chaos and shock.
At least 49 people were killed and dozens wounded during services. They were imprisoned. These terrible events in the city of Christchurch.
It's clear that this can now only be described as a terrorist attack.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the stories we're tracking this week. In the aftermath of Christchurch, the role the news media played in covering the story and what led to it. CNN, Kellyanne Conway, the puff piece, and the online blowback. Senegal, where politicians and rappers are connected at the hip. And message in a bottle.
Fascism.
A rather confusing one from the Israeli election campaign. It's been just over a week now since 50 people, Muslim worshippers, were massacred in New Zealand. The gunman live-streamed his killing spree on Facebook, and the video, all 17 minutes of it, spread from there. There's a depressing pattern to the coverage of stories like this one. The big tech platforms scramble to take down the offending video and then face questions over whether they did enough quickly enough. Mainstream news outlets enter a state of inner conflict. Playing that video on a loop would be wrong, but they've got clicks and ratings to consider. They find a face to put on the story, not the murderers, since he's a white supremacist. They go for New Zealand's Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, a white politician getting far more coverage than the victims. Our starting point this week is not New Zealand. It's Australia. It's where the killer came from. And it's where a lot of people are blaming the media, especially news outlets owned by Rupert Murdoch, for sowing the seeds of the hate unleashed in Christchurch. Journalism is built through words and images. Sometimes, though, the story lies in the numbers. A study conducted by One Path Network, an Islamic media outlet based in Sydney, tallied up the number of negative stories that 5 Australian newspapers owned by Rupert Murdoch's News Corp produced in the year 2017.
These days, Islam sells. So it's no surprise that newspapers are cashing in. But you might be shocked to know just how much they are.
It found almost 3,000 such stories referring to Islam or Muslims alongside words such as radical, violence, or terrorism. Headlines like enemy at the gates, behead of the class, from Syria with hate.
And that's just in 2017. We're talking more than 8 articles a day portraying Islam and Muslims negatively.
Once every second day in 2017, there was a front page that demonized and spoke negatively about Muslims. This is bound to have an impact on the way that Australians and mainstream perceive Islam and Muslims. Murdoch has personally come out and attacked Muslims on Twitter previously. His newspapers are quite disproportionate in their coverage. When it comes to Muslims, they exaggerate certain aspects. They are quite divisive and dangerous, and sometimes they're completely wrong. If Islam was a person, then Islam would have a very good defamation case against the Murdoch press.
The media is still powerful in the sense that a lot of people turn to it as their primary source of news and information. Certainly for older Australians and people who continue to watch free-to-air TV and consume the mainstream newspapers, they're not really getting a diversity of views. I don't want this to be a bashing of one particular news organisation. It's actually across the board. Some places are just more egregious than others.
And while the Murdoch media empire is headquartered in New York and entrenched in London, it got its start and remains hugely influential in Australia. That's where the Christchurch killer was born, raised, and in all likelihood, radicalized. If Australia's mainstream media helped form the murderer's beliefs, his ideology, then social media was where he went to spread it. His first stop was on a website called 8chan. He posted his manifesto there, 73 pages of it, the day before the massacres. Then he live-streamed his attack on Facebook. From there, it spread, reposted on YouTube, talked about on Reddit, traveling the world before the big tech platforms even saw what was happening on their sites. The killer clearly understood the way the internet works and exploited that.
I do think that there was a type of mocking the media kind of element to it. I took away from that there was a clear attempt to game both the media system and use its coverage patterns against it, but also use that media system to gain attention for what he was trying to do at the same time.
The internet is a double-edged sword. I know it was lauded in the past as a tool to put forward underrepresented voices. We know now that it's also amplified the voices of hate, that for every instance of its use to topple authoritarian regimes, we have incidents like the live streaming of the murder of 50 Muslim New Zealanders.
The early days of the internet were kind of like the Wild West. Anybody can have a voice, anybody can have an opinion, and it's great. It's not that way anymore. And so their business models don't work if they shut people down. You could look at them as a pure distillation of free expression ideology, but I would say more this is a market choice, you know, that their sites don't exist literally if people aren't able to post and comment.
I think we should recognize that white supremacy and other ideologies of hate pre-existed the internet. So while we pay due attention to the sheer speed and global reach of the internet, we need to talk about how hateful ideologies come into being, what allows them to flourish. And I have to say that although internet platforms have a reach and spread that other media don't have, print media and broadcast media are not without their share of responsibility.
When the story broke across the mainstream news media, the New Zealand government quickly banned domestic outlets from showing the video, deeming the material objectionable. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, went further when she vowed to never say the gunman's name.
He sought many things from his act of terror, but one was notoriety. And that is why you will never hear me mention his name.
After mass shootings at 2 mosques.
Many global news outlets followed that same approach voluntarily, choosing not to show the video, images of the perpetrator, or identify him by name. The exceptions, one of which was the Mail Online, a British news website, were widely criticized and quickly shamed into taking the video down. Prime Minister Ardern has been a near constant feature in the news coverage, widely praised for the sensitivity she showed to the victims' families and her government's almost instant ban on semi-automatic weapons. Somehow, a politician who campaigned on reducing immigration to New Zealand has become the face of this story, an incongruity that was noted by this Cambridge University academic.
Well, let me first clarify. I think it is good that Jacinda Ardern, as Prime Minister, is doing her job. She's doing it with dignity and competence, so I have no issues with her.
There's a but coming.
The but has to do with not who Jacinda Ardern is, but what function she is playing. 50 people who are Muslim have lost their lives. They should be at the heart of this story. Part of what is happening, I think, is a degree of damage control, and I think the figure of Jacinda Ardern is being deployed to do that damage control, which is to say, the repeated claim, this is not who we are. I think a more helpful claim is to say, this is not who we want to be, and we need to grapple with this as a community so that we can become who we aspire to be, rather than just insisting this is not who we are.
When news organizations put such a focus on a single figure, they must perceive a need on the part of white audiences, the people doing the clicking. Can you what kind of need would we be talking about?
I think that we know this from Hollywood, that stories that don't have a white character somewhere along the way, even if it's a largely black cast, don't elicit wide interest. And I think that the idea goes well beyond Hollywood. It comes to our news stories as well. And I think it is not accidental that Jacinda Ardern elicits the clicks that news organizations and platforms need, because here is somebody who does allow a certain kind of redemption narrative.
The whole body.
If Prime Minister Ardern really is a white redeemer, she now has plenty of company. This past Friday, the Muslim call to prayer was broadcast nationwide on state-owned television. News anchors wore headscarves in solidarity. So did countless women of all religious descriptions, sending messages of their own. However, this story did not start in New Zealand. Its causes lie elsewhere, including Australia, and the so-called news outlets that have trafficked in hate for so long. For them, redemption is still a long way off.
These people need to be accountable for their actions, and although some of them have come out with words of condolences and some messages of support, please, thanks, but no thanks. Cheap messages of support are not something that we need. We need radical change. We need new laws to protect Muslims from this Islamophobia. Because the reality is that you have contributed to the Islamophobic climate in Australia and New Zealand and around the world. Your words, your actions are complicit.
We're discussing other media stories that are on our radar with one of our producers, Meenakshi Ravi. Meena, CNN put out a piece this week, a rather lengthy one, on the White House spokesperson Kellyanne Conway. It got a lot of flack over that report. Walk us through that story.
So this story is part of a series that's being run by CNN. It's called, and I'm not kidding, Badass Women DC. It's about powerful women in the U.S. Capitol.
Fighting for Trump on TV is valuable currency for a cable news-obsessed president. But
the report runs 8.5 minutes, and it profiles one of the most prolific liars of the Trump administration. Now, bear in mind, CNN says that it does facts-first journalism. And throughout this entire report, there's just a passing mention of Kellyanne Conway's deliberate and persistent disinformation.
But she is heavily criticized for sometimes taking it too far, entering the realm of alternative facts.
There are lots of problems here. It's not just what the report omits, it's also the way in which CNN normalizes Conway and the role that she's playing. Now, there are actually interview producers at CNN who have said they will not book Conway because of her lies. And now you see this puff piece on the same network. Now, on social media, the blowback was immediate. There were lots of comments and GIFs and people asking, why would the network even do this? Now, one of the only plausible theories is access. Trump and CNN are at loggerheads. However, in Washington, access still matters.
So you got in touch with CNN, asked them questions about this. No one gets back to you. But those questions, they went beyond this particular report, didn't they?
Yes. We're heading towards the 2020 presidential elections, and I wanted to ask CNN, given their experience of the 2016 cycle, had they learned anything? Are we going to see anything different? Now, you might remember during the primary season, CNN would just cut to Trump rallies and run them in their entirety. It's great for ratings, but for the candidate, it's basically a free ride, just free airtime. After those elections, CNN President Jeff Zucker, he spoke to New York Times Magazine, and he said, the idea that politics is sport is undeniable. We understood that, and we approached it that way. The recipe for the network hasn't changed. CNN still books Trump backers who come onto the air, they lie, they create flashpoints that are made for TV. There's an over-reliance on panel discussions with a fair amount of shouting. It's what CNN calls a diversity of perspectives. Reasonable viewers have come not to expect anything of Fox News. They used to do of CNN. But looking at all of this, it doesn't bode very well for the elections coming up.
Okay, thanks, Meena. Senegal's presidential election, held late last month, may have passed you by. After all, what sets the West African nation apart from many of its neighbors, a stable and steady democracy, doesn't usually make news. However, those following the campaign would have been struck by one of the defining features of Senegalese politics: hip-hop artists and the pivotal roles that they can play in elections. A major reason for that? Demographics. The average age of citizens there is exceptionally low, just 19. Rappers were among the founders of the country's largest social movement, credited with swaying the previous election back in 2012. Since then, a social media boom has boosted rap's reach even further, and Senegalese politicians have taken note. This year, all the leading candidates hit the campaign trail with at least one rapper in their corner. The Listening Post's Daniel Touri now on how hip-hop became the language of politics for Senegal's youth.
In most countries, political candidates hope for the endorsement of a newspaper or two, perhaps a media mogul. But in Senegal, if last month's election was anything to go by, rappers seem to be the influencers to get on side. The incumbent, President Macky Sall, had the group Bido Boo Best. For former Prime Minister Idrissa Seck, it was Daddy Bibson. Meanwhile, another candidate, Ousmane Sonko, had 4 MCs backing him.
I think the reason why rappers have played such a central role in Senegalese politics is partly because the country is extraordinarily young. Many young people turn to hip-hop artists as being kind of the voice of the streets and providing them a way to think about politics. Especially in the most recent presidential election, the use of rappers was a remarkably cynical attempt by these politicians to gain popularity with youth. You saw all of the major Senegalese presidential candidates trying to find endorsements from rappers. This was, very much an attempt to try to neutralize the impact of Kurgi.
The rap duo Kurgi is one of Senegal's most political and most popular groups. Kurgi doesn't endorse specific candidates out of principle, but its anti-government anthem, Kaisa Okur, was the biggest hit of the campaign. Sai means trickster in Wolof, Senegal's main language, an insult aimed squarely at President Macky Sall, and one he didn't take kindly to. Sall's response spoke to the impact that hip-hop, and Kurgi in particular, can have on young voters. Back in 2011, the rappers helped found the social movement Janamar, French for We've Had Enough. And the following year, when Macky Sall was in opposition trying to get elected, the movement was credited with tipping the vote his way.
Janamar,
along with other young rappers, played a pivotal role in the fight against the former president, Abdoulaye Wade. Wade had wanted to change the constitution, but Janamar mobilized citizens and even politicians and helped get the bill defeated. Then, in the presidential election in 2012, their opposition to Wade had a major impact on the result and the transfer of power to Macky Sall. It was nothing short of a political revolution.
C'était carrément une grosse révolution politique.
Macky Sall connaît la puissance du hip-hop.
Macky Sall is well aware of the power hip-hop has in Senegal. Before 2012, we were just protesting rappers who focused on political and social issues. But that year, we felt a sense of urgency and we took the Janamar movement to the streets. The former president had banned protest marches, so we launched what we called urban guerrilla poetry. Buses going around the country to get people to register to vote. We wrote raps like, if you're 18 years old, go get registered. During the campaign, Macky Sall came to meet us. He said, I'll limit my term to 5 years, my family won't be involved in public affairs, I'll do this, I'll do that. But it turned out to be nothing but lies. Someone like that doesn't deserve another mandate.
This time around, the Janamar rappers were not able to repeat the success they had had 5 years earlier in unseating the president. Macky Sall was re-elected. Nonetheless, hip-hop seems to have secured a place at the political table.
Senegal itself is quite distinctive within the West African sub-region. Senegal has always been known as a society that is very supportive of the arts. Leopold Senghor, the first Senegalese president himself, was a poet, an intellectual who devoted tremendous amounts of resources to developing the culture in Senegal. Collectively, a lot of money was put into the arts.
In the US, rappers who talk about sex, drugs, make millions. But here, if you don't talk about the issues that are relevant to people, you won't be respected. Artists take their responsibilities seriously, and we write politically conscious lyrics. It's important to remember that hip-hop is meant to be a tool for raising awareness, a tool of social transformation.
Est un outil de transformation sociale.
Bienvenue, installez-vous, on a des nouvelles pour vous. Il y a de bonnes, il y a de mauvaises, mais il y a des nouvelles pour vous.
The power of hip-hop as a gateway to Senegal's youth goes beyond politics. Journal Rappé is a newscast wrapped to a beat. Its founders, Human and Katie, rhyme their take on the news in French
Un seul appareil de radiothérapie pour tous les 14 millions d'habitants de ce pays.
and Wolof. They even host debates.
Sceptique, es-tu pour que le Sénégal envoie 2100 de nos militaires? Dis-moi, non, je suis pas d'accord.
Journal Rappé started life on YouTube, but its success in attracting Senegal's digital natives soon caught the attention of mainstream media.
Journal Rappé, nous commencé YouTube When it comes to talking about social issues, rap is the most powerful medium because it gets to the biggest audience. Journal Rapé started on YouTube and then Channel 2S TV also broadcast it. Its journalists were reticent to begin with because they thought that we were messing with the news, but they quickly understood that we were not trying to take their place. On the contrary, we are trying to help them with their work.
Traditional media like television and radio have had to adapt and catch up with changing times. It's no longer like before when we had a monopoly on the news. The rise of social media meant we had to update our output. Journal Rapé is a way of simplifying political news and making it accessible to citizens who might not want to watch news broadcasts. They do not report the news, they do not produce information. They take news already pre-processed by television channels to present it to citizens with a taste of music. And it's lovely. It's quite an artistic creation.
The social media boom underway in Africa, driven by young populations and cheap Chinese smartphones, has enabled Journal Rapé to go international. Backed by the NGO, the Open Society Initiative for West Africa, its rappers have kick-started similar projects across the region. In Mali, Mauritania, Guinea, the Ivory Coast, Togo, and Burkina Faso. And Journal Rapé is not alone in taking conscious rap beyond Senegal's borders. Kyrgyz have also started something of a butterfly effect, with more traditional means and more radical ends.
Janamar has inspired people in many African countries. For example, we went to Burkina Faso and together with rappers and civil society activists there, we created the Ballet Citoyen movement, which helped overthrow the president in 2014. We went to the Republic of Congo, to Equatorial Guinea, to Mali, to Gambia, Madagascar, to meet young activists and musicians from various movements. And last year, we hosted a gathering with all of them here in Dakar. We think hip-hop can serve as an agent of change in Africa, in developing the youth of the future.
The influence of Senegalese rappers in West Africa and beyond has been pretty extraordinary. One of the most interesting political phenomena I've seen. They were actually able to foment popular movements in multiple West African countries. So hip-hop artists have really sort of recognized that they can play this role in mobilizing youth, and it is a tremendous credit to the activism of Senegalese rappers in particular.
It's a kind of activism that will have some West African leaders shifting nervously. But back in Senegal, the political elite seem to have embraced the power of hip-hop, in the hope that they can call the tune.
And finally, the Israeli election is a little more than 2 weeks away, and the campaigns have produced some shocking ads. Back in January, one candidate, Benny Gantz, ran a spot with a kill counter, adding up the number of Palestinian terrorists killed when he was the army's chief of staff. Turned out that many of them were just civilians. The latest ad to go viral is from the country's Minister of Justice. The video is about fascism in a bottle, a perfume bottle. If you're confused, watching this ad won't really help. The politician, Ayelet Shaked, has been trying to curb the power of the Israeli Supreme Court. The ad is a spoof that tries to get at that issue, but is either A, lost in translation, B, far too subtle to be effective satire, or C, just a bad idea. It's getting a lot of views, but not necessarily for the right reasons. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
פשיזם, מהפכה שיפוטית, צמצום אקטיביזם, מינוי שופטים, משילות, הפרדת רשויות, יישום בג"ץ, פשיזם.
לי זה מריח כמו דמוקרטיה.